Angela Princewell,
And I'm Shireen Abdi.
and our podcast, the first for the year 2024, is New Year, New You. So, Shireen, let's lay it on. It's a new year. We all have, these new goals, and hopefully, part of it isn't just external, right? Because we all have these goals to eat healthier, to be fitter, and all of that. Well, to be honest, I quit. I don't even make those goals anymore because I just can't seem to keep them. But on a more serious note, when you're looking at your family, what version, a better version of life do you have for you and your family? And so we want to kind of think about this in terms of separation. If you've been going through a difficult time and part of your goals might be to separate from your partner, well, let's talk about that. Shireen, let's talk about even this concept of, is separation the best option in all cases?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the times we tend to internalize like where we are in life and then what better time to start than the new year. So, and a lot of the times people ask themselves like, do I want to continue this relationship with this person? If historically they've been unhappy and, it's kind of the starting point. So really think of a decision if this is the best time to separate.
And it may not be, maybe separation is not the best option. Like maybe communication, maybe, counseling, maybe you just need a time off because there's a lot of triggers in life that cause stress to relationships, right? I mean, I can think of a few. Losing your job, for example, inflation, the high interest rates,
Finances, like
new family, just there's just so much that could be introducing stress to your relationship, and the fact that you're going through a difficult time right now doesn't necessarily mean that the way out is for you to separate, go through a separation or a divorce. But in a lot of cases it might be the best option for all parties. It might not feel that way right now, but if you've come to the decision that separation is the best option for you, if you've tried counseling, if you've tried communicating with your partner, and there's just no way out, then sometimes, you just have to move on.
hmm
And
exactly.
I don't like that I'm saying that so sadly, actually, because no, it's an exciting new opportunity. It is the death of one aspect. It's the death of a relationship, or maybe death is even too extreme because sometimes it's just the transformation of a relationship.
I like to call it chapters. And I
Hmm.
say, normally when people go through separation, that this hopefully will be the next best chapter that you have. And it's just kind of closing the book on one chapter and moving on to the next and figuring out what you want for you and what your family might look like and what decisions that would have and how that would impact, of course, yourself, the family, and if you have children involved and kind of what to do going forward.
Yes. So if you're thinking, well, the best move for me would be to move on from this relationship and step into the next exciting chapter of my life, well, we want you to make smart decisions. We want you to think things through. Now, I know that you're not going to see the entire big picture and things never play out the way you imagine, but at least put your mind to some things. Because when we meet with clients, I usually always ask clients what they want, right? And not necessarily because I think they should always get what they want, or it might not even be the best thing for them, or it might not be realistic under the circumstances, but it's always a good starting point. What do you want? So it would start with some big areas to look at, right? So, Shirin, let's start with maybe parenting. What are some things to consider if you're going to separate?
Absolutely. With parenting, it's almost it's interesting because when I speak to people for the first time, they almost don't know either. They don't really think of it to the extent that if you have children, you would look at the future of not living together. What would parenting look like? What would the schedule look like? What are your work schedules? So the things that you have to consider are who has the capacity to care for the children. What kind of schedule is conducive for them, and also for yourselves because people have odd work hours. You might find someone who's a police officer and has shift work, and
Hmm.
there's like odd schedules where there's 7 days on, 7 days off. So
Yeah.
you have to look at the situation that you're both in, and of course, what's the best interest for the children? How young are the children? So what does the day-to-day schedule look like? How would you guys communicate about decisions?
Yeah.
Where would the children go to school if you inevitably have to leave the home? what kind of you kind of want to think about the futuristic issues and problems that you might encounter, but also what's realistic for your family.
Yes.
So who's going to make decisions for them, and
Mm-hmm.
major decisions such as, do they get this surgery or that surgery? Do they go to this school? Do they, participate in this sport? Whatever the situation might be, it's good to put your mind to it now because it helps direct things kind of going forward.
Yeah.
And obviously when you get, a lawyer involved, it also would help streamline the process for you. And it
Mhm.
makes it a lot easier when you yourself know kind of what an idea and what a goal is. And the reality is those goals might change, but
Mhm.
having an idea of, what you can live with, what you can't live with, what's a deal breaker, what's not a deal breaker is really essential. So with parenting, it's really a lot of it is very important. So, I mean, I know we'll talk into the financial piece about support and things like that, but yeah, just things that you'd have to encounter are decision making, schedules, and
Mhm.
then what's realistic for the children and for the parties too.
I know. And your family, remember, your family is unique. So what might have happened in another person's family doesn't necessarily apply to yours. And an example would be, well, you may think, well, John had 50-50 parenting, so I should have that as well. Well, if John does a 9 to 5 and is able to drop the kids off at school, it might be different if your job requires you to start work at 5 a.m. and come back at an odd time. I'm not saying it's impossible, but then you have to think, well, how cooperative would my partner be? Because yes, if you start work at 5, maybe you can have somebody else somebody drop the kids off and you pick them back up. But don't just throw out the concept of you want that equal parenting time if you've not also, if you don't at the back end think, okay, how am I going to make that work? And it may be with the cooperation of the partner you're separating from, or it might be family that you have that could assist you with this process. So again, parenting is a big area, and just think about things. Obviously, this is just from your perspective. It would be fine tuned as you go along and we get input from the other side, but it's just consider your family, your life, and how things would go. So,
Yeah, and sorry, I just wanted to add one
yeah.
point. So when you're thinking of parenting, try really hard not to just think of historical parenting because that's often what a lot of parties would do is that look at, well, I've traditionally taken on this role, but
Hmm.
when you're separating, it's a new structure of your family. So the court would also, look at it from that dynamic. Just because one party was not historically the primary
Hmm.
caregiver doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to take on a bigger role because you're separated now. So think of kind of what you can live with, and if the other party has the capacity, even though generally, like maybe you've taken on that role. So don't necessarily look at it, well, this is what's going to happen because this is what I'm used to and this is what's been happening. Think of it as a new kind of token that you have to now take a look at a fresh perspective and
Yeah.
a very objective, to some extent, of course, because these are your children. As
Hmm.
objective as one can be realistically, but
Yeah.
just something to consider.
And it might be from a practical, right? So if you're saying the reason why I've always taken care of them and should continue to take care of them is because, I'm the better suited parent. I work 5 minutes from home, or I've traditionally not worked and I don't see me going back into the workforce right away. Then those are kind of practical perspectives to look at things. Or it might be you don't, there's safety concerns with the other parent and things like that, right? But you find that when people go through a separation, the other party would step up a little bit more. And, if that's the case, well, is that something that you're willing to accommodate, or are there objective reasons why that might not be in the children's best interest? So that's a lot to think about under parenting. And I want us to be able to move on to something else because we could go on and on right there. But we think you get the idea. Just put your mind to what you can. And remember, these are just ideas we're throwing out at you. You don't have to have it all figured out. We don't even necessarily want you to have it all figured out. We just want you to have an idea of what you would like to see happen. So another thing to consider is, how would you divide property?
Yeah, so things to consider with respect to like property issues. So obviously I've talked about, what to do when, the home has to be sold. So if you guys own the home jointly, there are issues that might have to be resolved, such as Okay, are you going to sell the home? Is there a buyout that's going to take place? Also, there's property division, and property for purposes of family law really means bank account balances, investments, pensions, really anything tangible that you can think of, your cars.
Doll collection, card collection, Pokemon collections, NFTs,
And yeah,
everything
any
that has
valuable,
value.
exactly. Any valuable, like, I mean, we're not talking about laptops and things like that. Like, so I don't want to get that specific, but
Mhm,
there are things that need to be dealt with and divided, and
mhm,
there's a specific formula and a calculation that goes into that, but I'm not going to divulge too deeply. But a lot of the times people don't really understand the consequences or the benefits of what the law has and what would be
mhm.
provided to them if they do separate, especially
And
if
there's a lot
they're,
of myths too out there, right? Shirley? I think this is a good point to add that you can look at some of our programs when it comes to we've done a lot of extensive podcasts on property division, right, and equalization, because some people don't realize what it is property, and they would say things like, "Well, but it's in my name, or it belonged to
yes,
me, or I bought it, or she never contributed," and things like it's a lot of misconception when it comes
absolutely. And
to
the law, there's
property.
a lot of exceptions and there's a lot of exclusions and deductions that could apply.
Mhm.
So, a lot of the things that you might think would happen, and a lot of, I'll tell you generally what the most common ones are, which is what Angela said, which is basically that if it's in your name, you don't share it, or that everything gets divided equally and that's it.
Yes.
And those are both not true.
Yeah.
There's a formula that goes into it, and I don't want to divulge too deeply, but it is a factor you need to consider. What properties do you have? What properties that are joint that you guys need to deal with? Do you have investment properties?
Oh, here's a tip, Sharon. How about if you're actually seriously considering separation, begin now to print your bank statements if you can.
Yeah,
If you can, if depending if it's a marriage and you want to print, or even from the date you started living together with someone, you can go to the banks and see if they still have records for that date, because the difference, I know a lot of financial institutions only keep records for about 7 years. So if you're right at the cusp, it might be worthwhile to just go get those bank statements for the day you got married or started living together, and just have that
ready to
ready
go.
when you need to deal with it. And obviously this is one area where we strongly advise that you talk to a lawyer, because a lot of people see it as an expense, but what you don't realize is you might end up overpaying if you're just dealing with your partner alone. So there's deductions and things that we can get you, or there's also the fact that we can save you a lot of grief. If something's going to go down a certain way, we can let you know this is how it's going to play out, and you can save yourself costs. Because if you have a partner if that has a lawyer, and you spend a lot of time and money arguing over issues that you should ordinarily have agreed to, remember that you're looking at paying that person's legal fees as well. So it's not just your legal fees you should be concerned about, there's also the other sides. But
Yeah, so the finances are it's probably the most challenging aside from parenting to really divulge into, because there's a lot of different aspects to it. It can mean the difference between you being able to purchase a home, what your cash flow would look like, what your future would look like. If you're the support payor, there's a lot of difference. It's going to be quite different for you. And if there's a spousal support component, it might be not what you're accustomed to, but really what the other party's only able to pay under the law. And so there's a lot of different like this is where really legal advice comes in handy, of course.
mhm,
So you definitely want to keep in mind that you might be overpaying, like Angela said, and like a very like obvious one is, for example, like if you have RRSPs, it's not just the straight value of like splitting your RSPs. There are taxes that you get to deduct that are contingent on someone exercising those funds. So you would be able to reduce that asset. So
mhm.
it's not necessarily a sharing. And well,
I've
it's
seen
never really an equal sharing, but
Yeah, I've seen people even say, well, we'll just divide, they'll calculate what who owes what, and then they decide, well, I'll just transfer the money. I'll just do an RSP transfer. Well, that's not necessarily accurate either if you're the person receiving it, because remember, at some point in the future, you're going to have to pay taxes on that amount. So there's ways that we calculate that. But I think at this preliminary step, is just for you to begin to just get organized. Think about the assets that you guys own, begin to put together, a list, just even
Yeah.
just a simple list of your bank accounts
Your disclosure. If you
and
know
things
the
like
date
that.
of separation, then begin to, collate the disclosure for those dates too. And honestly, it's really just a matter of it's a disclosure piece. If you think that the other person is also not going to be fair to the situation, it might be worthwhile investigating their financial situation because a lot of the time people will not be honest and there are ways around that, but also just getting some documentation to support, the other's financial circumstance. If you're privy to that information, great.
I mean,
You
we're
know,
not asking at this point, we're not asking you to go invade their space and
yeah,
steal their documents. I mean, we're really not trying to put you in an uncomfortable position
yeah,
there. But I mean, if you have joint accounts, for example, if you have, access, as Jerry said, most couples do have access to each other's documentation if you want to begin to take pictures and photos, but just recognizing that there will be property to be divided and just starting to put it together, maybe even think about certain things. So if you have beyond the equalization bit, right? If you have a home together, who is going to remain in the home? Do you want to live? There's some people that have maybe an investment condo, for example. If it's not currently rented, well, is one party going to move there until things get finalized? So again, it's just that idea of putting your mind to these things. If this is something that you're going to be, if separation is something you're going to be embarking on in 2024. Um,
yeah,
Shireen, you had touched on this a little bit. You touched on support. That's something to consider both ways, right? If you're the support payer, recognize that you're not going to have all of your income at your disposal anymore because you may have a support obligation. There's calculators online that could do preliminary numbers for you, but ideally you want to talk to a lawyer so they could run through different scenarios of how spousal support especially would play out in your case. Or maybe you don't even have that obligation if you're the recipient as well. Sometimes people don't realize how little they might be entitled to, because when you're together with someone, you might find that you have access to 99% of their income at your disposal to use, but now you're separating and you might find out that the amount of spousal support and child support you get might not be sufficient to maybe leave the lifestyle that you're used to. And it's not to scare you or anything. It just means that you need to begin to plan better. You need to just have an idea of how much you would have available to you as you prepare for this new year and the next chapter that's coming on, right?
exactly. So definitely, I think on the financial piece and the property pieces, the one advice I would give is definitely I mean, have discussions. It's worthwhile. Like, we always like to kind of get an idea of where you guys are and what you've been able to agree to, and that's great. But I would never agree to certain things without getting independent legal advice.
Mm-hmm.
You could be, for example, if you put the investment property in one party's name and then they sell it and then they're incurring a significant amount of capital gains tax, something that you never thought you would incur. And there's a lot of consequences or things that you need to kind of gauge before making a very informed decision on something like that. So just definitely speak to a lawyer on, the financial pieces, but it's worthwhile kind of collating and gathering and getting an understanding of what the finances look like. And even putting together a list of expenses would be useful, so that you can even, and in projected expenses too. So what the future would have, like, what do you reasonably need? How much do you spend a month? How much would you
Mm-hmm.
spend a month if you had to do it on your own? So those things are pretty useful.
Yeah. So a lot for you to consider. And if you've decided that separation is the best decision for you this year, and you have children, you have to think about how would you parent them going forward? How would you care for them? How would you provide for them financially? Where would you live? And what kind of what would things look like when your property is divided and when support's being paid one way or another? We don't expect you to have these answers. We just threw a lot of ideas at you so that you can think about them. And ideally, you want to talk to a lawyer because everyone's situation is different. Some people are cash flow rich and property poor. And for some people, it's the reverse. And so we would need to look at your circumstances to make to make sense of the situation for you. And in some cases, we would even refer you to a financial advisor, for example, if you need to plan, if it's relevant to your situation. But do talk to a lawyer. Do think about how you want things to go. And really, now let's talk about fun stuff because we're talking about how things are and how it's going to change. Let's talk about this vision of the new you, right? So, life post separation, and this comes from what we've heard from a lot of our clients that come back to say hello. It's actually fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we just don't hear from those that are not doing great, but I would say in 99% of the cases, everyone's like glad, they're happy.
Exactly. Like they're much happier. I mean, from the testimonials that we've heard.
I mean, very informal study of hundreds and hundreds of clients that we've served over the years. Is there everyone's just seems generally happier.
Yeah, and that's the amazing part is that, a lot of the time people feel like they're stuck in a situation, and when they've resolved all these issues that they've kind of neglected or just didn't want to deal with because A, they have children and it makes it more complicated, but they've,
Hmm.
put the priority on focusing on themselves and what their future would look like, and that might entail separation, like they've been happier for it. Like generally, like I've met people that are like, I'm so glad I can't, I almost like the sentiment I get is, I wish I did this sooner. Because most of the
Yes.
time was when people see a lawyer, they've thought about this many times before. It wasn't on a whim. I mean, there are certain situations where it is, an event or an immediate response or something that might occur. But most of the time, it's a pondering of, what do I do? Do I stay? Do I go?
Hmm.
Maybe we'll do this next year. And it's a kind of a never ending circle. But when you finally get out of it, they're genuinely happier for it. And it's sometimes stressful to deal with these issues, but not in comparison to from generally what I've heard, that it was worth it in
And
every
even
sense.
the ones that, I used to feel worse for people who it wasn't their choice to separate because it's almost like this was thrown on them. And some people are genuinely blindsided, like they did not
Yeah.
see anything. But even in those cases, like I ran into a client of ours the other day at the mall, and she had met her true soulmate, and it was just so beautiful. And I remember when she was our client, and she did not expect the separation. She thought they were doing great. He was having an affair. And of course, she went through all of the process of, you feel stupid at one point and and she went through all of that, but it was just so beautiful seeing her. And she's showing me pictures of these children that I had, had I don't want to call it a fight. We had very intense conversations with the other side about 8 years ago, but now they looked so big. The youngest is going, just got into university. It was beautiful to see. The kids were happy. They were thriving. My client was thriving. And yes, and it's just nice to see that you get control of your life back, right? So sometimes when, I find that a lot of people when they're going through this separation, there's almost this sense of losing control. And it's really not your fault. It's not that it makes sense. We're just look at the few things Shireen and I have asked you to consider, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. You're going to be asked to make so many decisions. If you don't agree to things, you probably would be thrown to a judge that would make these decisions for you in a way in a manner that you may not even like. So there's just everything seems out of control now. Things seem you know not together. It may seem gloomy. Well, the weather also doesn't make it, that doesn't help, but we're just saying there's light at the end of the tunnel. Just think about the new, happier, healthier. And by healthy, I don't just mean physically, mentally, in every area of your life. You're going to be happy. Your children are going to be thrilled. You're
Yeah.
gonna find a way to make it financially. Don't worry. We promise things do come together somehow.
Exactly. I mean, I had a client recently. This matter has only begun, but she's just formally moved out of the home. She's already happier and lighter for it. Like
Mm-hmm.
genuinely, she's
Mm-hmm.
at such peace, and it's amazing to see. And it's just, you just don't realize how much weight and how much stress that you carry from a relationship and from
Yeah.
keeping it together until you can't.
Mm-hmm.
But like Angela said, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And I mean, of course, we're here to help in any way that we can. And we genuinely hope that, you'll take some of these things to heart and just kind of go through them. And we're not in any way encouraging you to separate. We're just saying if you are at that point, these are just some helpful tips maybe that you would come across.
Yes. So as you think about, the new you in this new year, we don't want you to just think about the new you in terms of just the superficial things, again, I started this earlier by talking about the productivity tips that people have. We're going to work harder, run faster, and all of that. But what about yourself? Your family relationships is the most important relationship you would ever have. And you really, really want to look in the mirror and face that relationship. I like the way, Shireen, you put it earlier. Like, it's just so much weight trying to hold it together until you can't anymore. And, much as we don't want you to take the decision to separate lightly, sometimes it is the best decision for you, and you would feel lighter for it, way lighter than if you lost 100 pounds. That's what we've been told. But yes, you will be better, you will be happier, you will have, and you know what? Sometimes people worry about children and or people and things like that. I have met many children that actually admire their parents more for it, right? If you're in a relationship where you're being abused and you believe you're staying for the children, more often than not, the children respect you more when you actually leave, because now they see the strong person that's, moving from a bad situation and becoming better and stronger and can stand on their own. So the point is, I am excited for you. I am very excited about 2024. I hope you are too. And I know that, for some people, it would mean having to start a completely new life by themselves. And I want you to know that we are excited for you. Consider some of the things we've talked about and make sure to seek out independent legal advice. But most importantly, put your eyes on the prize. You're going to be glad that when everything's done and you're living this amazing new chapter of your life. All right, that's it for now. Until next time. Bye.